Hi, I'm Debbie Georgatos. Welcome to my show, America, Can We Talk? Today, we're going to talk about election polls, NBA viewers, and the Electoral College. Dr. Ingrid Skop joins me to talk about Trump's health care plan, and Colin Kaepernick goes radical, wants no prisons. And of course, I'll tell you why these stories matter to you. Stay tuned.
Debbie Georgatos, host of America Can We Talk, is an author, attorney, and political analyst whose mission is to inspire the American political conversation about preserving liberty in the best country on earth.
Hello again, and welcome to America Can We Talk and to today's First Five. I'm Debbie Georgatos. I know some of you are getting very nervous as we get closer and closer to Election Day 2020, and so many polls are showing that Vice Presidential candidate former Vice President Biden is up in the polls against President Trump. National average 10 points in many polls, and in some swing states arguably also up. And so people are getting very anxious. How could these polls square with what everyone sees happening in America? I mentioned the other day in this show, the polls don't square with the reality on the ground. The number of times you will see a Biden rally or a Biden boat parade or a Biden parade with more than 3 cars in it is almost nothing. You see Trump boat parades. This is just obviously anecdotal or observational evidence, but you see Trump boat parades, Trump parades, streets in cities all over this country. The enthusiasm is endless. When he was in the hospital with COVID, you saw people outside the hospital just there to wish him well, to let him know we're thinking of him. So you have those kind of observational polls. But I think you should get to count in the polls the NBA stats. I'll remind you again, the NBA missed a lot of the season because of COVID and then came back to do a portion of their season. And in the most recent NBA, this is National Basketball Association, ladies, NBA Finals, the number of people who watched the final game, and if you are sports fans, as we are in our house, the NBA Finals, we never missed them. We didn't used to miss them. Same with NFL, same with college sports. But the NBA has chosen to go all radical, all in on Black Lives Matter, very, very willing and committed to be just as radically supportive of Black Lives Matter, painted on the court floor. So here are a few numbers about the NBA Finals. The NBA had a huge NBA Finals game. It was down, the number of people viewing this game, down by 70%, 7-0, over previous years. If you get this, this is Game 6, sixth and final game of the NBA Finals. Game 6 drew at its absolute highest numbers just a tiny bit over 6 million people. And if you think that sounds like a lot, take into consideration, for example, Game 6 last year, 2019 Game 6 NBA Finals, that had 18.34 million viewers. Over 3 times as many viewers watched the same game last year. And this year we're at a point when many people are not working. We've had starvation of for sports fans who haven't had NFL, haven't had NBA. You finally have games coming on, people dying to watch games, and they won't do it. They're so aggravated, so disgusted with the NBA's commitment to the radical Marxist Black Lives Matter movement, they will not watch. They will not watch. This is a poll, I'm telling you, every bit as valid as the polls the pollsters take around this country, talking about, who it is that, talking about all these players, the NBA people such as a big voice, LeBron James, coming out very, very supportive of Black Lives Matter, weighing in on cases before he had the facts straight, never correcting himself after the facts proved that there was not really the problem he said there was. So you have America saying no thank you to LeBron James, no thank you to the NBA. Contrast that, if you remember, one of the famous quotes by Michael Jordan, also, world class, one of the best players ever in basketball, who famously said, when all the politics started surrounding Colin Kaepernick and surrounding the Nike shoes and the players became more and more political, Michael Jordan's famous statement was, Republicans buy sneakers too. Yes, they do. half of America or more is so disgusted with the NBA that they will not watch, even in this sports-starved time, and this time when many people are sitting around the house with nothing to do because their businesses are still socially distancing, or they shut down, they don't have a business anymore, plenty of spare time in their hands, will not watch the NBA. I count that as a poll. But another and more serious point on the polling, and I am serious about that, anecdotal evidence does mean something. Many polls can be ignored. Many polls, if we dive in, as you often on the show, dive in, you see, well, the pollsters actually included in who they polled, 2/3 or more Democrats, which then obviously accounts for the outcome. But the other really important polling or information to focus on is what is happening with the Electoral College. And the reason I'm doing this today in this first five, I think there is just a tornado of determination on the left to make Trump voters, Trump supporters, feel beleaguered, to surrender, to give up, to assume there's just no way. Look at all the numbers. Biden is up by so much. We might as well give it up and go home. There is a determination on the left to dishearten the Trump supporters. And I want to encourage you, there's no reason to be disheartened. Ignore those polls, look at life, look at reality, and for a moment with me, look at what has happened with the Electoral College. This data I'm going to give you, you can go to our website, americacanwetalk.org, and on that homepage, under shows, drop down list of links, you can read this article. It's full of information. Basically, the conclusion of all this information is, at the end of the day, obviously the way we choose our president is through the Electoral College. And on Electoral College numbers, in 2016, Trump won by winning battleground states that few expected him to win. He did that then in 2016. Right now, he's polling slightly and relatively better in those swing states than he did 4 years ago. So the swing states that went with Trump last time, but it was close, he's doing even better this year in his race against Biden, or it's really not against Biden, it's against Harris or whoever really is going to run the country, because Biden is not capable of running the country. But you have all sorts of showing how Trump in 2020, his performance polls in Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Florida, Arizona, North Carolina, all compared to his 2016 polling performance. And 100 days out from this election, Biden was up by 6 points in battleground states. At a time, Clinton was only up 2.3. Now he's only up 4.9 points. At a time, Clinton was up by 5.1. And if you lost track of that data, the point being, the closer we get to election day, the worse Biden is doing, even compared with how Clinton did against Trump 4 years ago. I can give you a bunch of other data, but the bottom line of it is, do not get drawn in and upset and alarmed by the polling. Yes, Republicans have to work hard. Yes, Trump is going to throw his heart and soul into this next fewer than 4 weeks, 3+ weeks, in getting Americans in the swing states recognizing what is at stake in this election cycle. He is going to just campaign. He's going to have rallies. He's going to talk to the people in the same way he did in 2016. And Hillary Clinton stayed home in 2016 because she thought she was just had that election in the bag, thought nothing, she didn't have to make any effort in the swing states. And Biden doing a tiny bit more than Hillary Clinton did, often calling it a day, though, by around 10 in the morning and done for the day for different reasons. He isn't campaigning because he doesn't have the mental faculties to stay in this race and fight the way Trump can fight. There is, please, Trump voters, do not start to think that there is some big deficit. The deficit or the challenge we have in polling is not honest what the pollsters are telling you. Your eyes are telling you the truth about the size of the rallies, the size of the crowds every time Trump goes anywhere, the enthusiasm for him while he was in the hospital, and the simple reality that in the Electoral College polling, Trump is doing just fine. Read that article, read the numbers, he's doing just fine. At the end of the day, presidential election, that's all that matters, is the Electoral College. And that, my very fine friends, is today's First Five. I mentioned at the start of the show we have a guest joining us. We have a doctor joining us. We'll see her on the screen in a moment, Dr. Ingrid Skop. And she is in San Antonio. She's been in the practice of medicine. She's an obstetrician for 25 years. And she's also part of the, I believe it is the Doctors for Trump, or we'll let her tell us about that. But the reason I have her on, I want to tell you just a quick thing why I invited her on. So Last night, I have a good friend in Dallas who's a doctor, a woman doctor. So last night she called me and she said, did you hear about that President Trump held a meeting on healthcare policy with America's doctors on September 24th in North Carolina? And it was a big gathering of doctors who came to listen to President Trump's healthcare plan. And I said, no, never heard about it. And as you know, if you listen to my show very often, I'm pretty darn wonky. I read about everything. I never saw a reference to this. And the reason my friend was calling was, she said she was going over her notes. She attended that meeting in North Carolina. She's going through her own notes. And she said she was so frustrated that the media, A, didn't report in this meeting, but B, they continue the messaging the left is trying to send out that President Trump doesn't have a health care plan, doesn't have a health care policy. And you heard even in the debate when I believe Biden said it in his, as well as I believe Kamala Harris said in the VP debate, essentially, Trump doesn't have a plan. He doesn't have any health care plan. And what my friend, the doctor, was saying last night when she called me is, when leftists say that, what they mean is he doesn't have a centralized power in Washington, government control over the whole healthcare system plan. He doesn't have a plan to compete with the Democrats, which, regardless of what Biden says, are all headed towards socialized medicine. They're going to head towards single payer. And this is what my friend was saying is they don't count having responsible policies put in place by the president as a plan. It only counts for a plan if it is centralized control of the healthcare system. So she, this friend, wanted to share with me that that conference occurred in North Carolina and that there is actually plenty of thinking happening on the Republican side under President Trump with respect to healthcare policy in America. So now I'd like to introduce and welcome to our show, Dr. Ingrid Skop. Hello.
Thank you, Debbie. I appreciate the opportunity to come and discuss an issue that I'm passionate about. I agree. Most Americans, because they're not given the true story by the media, don't understand. They don't understand Trump's plan and they don't understand Biden's plan.
Well, I bet you sound like you do. So you know what? Actually, you told me, we talked on the phone today earlier, just briefly, and you mentioned on the phone that you had actually been part of phone calls during the Trump presidency, his making calls out to doctors. And I didn't even know such calls happened. So I love if you could just start telling us about that.
Yeah, there are a number of groups that are having conferencing calls almost on a weekly basis with the White House to discuss helping to get this information out to the public. I think most people understand that there are major problems with our healthcare system the way that it's currently being run. We know that it's terribly expensive, that about 1/6 of our gross domestic product goes toward healthcare, and yet we see that there are people who cannot get the coverage that they'd like. They cannot get access to the medications and to their physician, to the physician that they'd like to see as often as they should. We're told that Biden's plan is going to build upon the Affordable Care Act, but in reality, that's not true. He's incrementally inching toward socialized medicine. And I think when we look at the people such as his vice presidential candidate who have said without a doubt that they want socialized medicine and they would like to see private insurance go away, that's not what the average American wants. We have to make a distinction between having insurance coverage and having medical care. With single payer healthcare, everybody would have coverage, but there's no guarantee that they would get the care that they needed. There would be long lines, as there are in Canada and the UK, to access services. Many times there are not primary care physicians available. Trump's plan wants to, in a small way, correct many of the problems with our current healthcare system. He is doing this through executive action and also through legislative action when he can. Things like improving access to generic medications, allowing health service accounts, health savings accounts, which use pre-tax money to be used for more medical services and medications. There is something called a pharmacy gag clause that does not allow a pharmacist to tell you when an expensive medication has been prescribed that another less expensive medication that can treat your illness just as well as available. They're forbidden to tell customers that. And honestly, many times.
I'm sorry.
Oh, sure.
Where is that? I've never heard of pharmacy gag clause. That's in federal law?
It exists. I don't know what the legislation is, but it is, as a physician, I can tell you that doctors don't know what things cost. Many times a drug that's been available for 20 years, we may assume it's inexpensive. And then a patient will call and say, this was prohibitively expensive for me. Many times it has to do with what the coverage is through the insurance company. And in fact, there is some amount of give and take between insurance companies, pharmacies, and pharmaceutical companies, where they amongst themselves decide which drugs they're going to make the most profit off of, and those are the ones that they will preferentially give to the patient. So there's a lot of I would say bureaucracy and middlemen in our healthcare system, that a direct to consumer medical approach, a direct relationship between a physician and a patient that cuts out a lot of the middleman. We could easily cut the cost of many of these things without sacrificing care at all. And in fact, probably improving the quality of the care.
That's a ton of information. I was trying to take notes while you're talking. I gave up. So, but I love that. I love that you're so well informed about all this. And I do think, I'm going to go back to my one little point at the beginning. I know that you're in the practice of medicine, you're not political, but I am a little bit on this show. I'm a lot in this show political. But I think that the assumption the left has been trying to argue, and in this election cycle especially, Vice President Biden and Senator Harris have been arguing that Trump has no plan. He's not doing anything. So, but you're talking about things now that you're describing in the Trump plan that really are, they're not centralized control from Washington medicine, but they're actually addressing the challenges that you have found in your practice of medicine, and the Trump administration is trying to address those through policy changes. Is that accurate?
That is correct. In many ways, Trump is trying to make the relationship with the patient and the relationship with the doctor to be the priority, instead of the relationship to the insurance company, to the bureaucrats, to all the other middlemen. And in regards to the individual exchanges, and just as he does in so many areas of the economy, Trump wants to open insurance up to the free market. Competition will clearly drive prices down, and that will enable people to find more affordable plans when they can be bargained in a larger group, maybe across state lines. So there's many free market approaches that can really help, I think, to drive down the cost. The ACA mandated that people buy plans that had a large amount of coverage many times that they did not need. If a woman had a hysterectomy, she was still mandated to buy a plan that covered obstetric care. So President Trump is trying to initiate the ability to have plans that are more specific for a person's given needs, that will clearly also be less expensive to that person when it doesn't cover everything that they're not going to ever need to use. So there's many other ways that he can help to make things more affordable for the patients.
Oh, yeah. You know, just the whole concept of an outside of government person, President Trump, coming in to become president and trying to help with the healthcare system. He's bringing his own thinking from his life, which was not immersed in government programs, not immersed in Congress and the Senate, but rather just he understands free markets, and he sees those principles and brings them to bear in so many different aspects of governing. But I want to go back to what, it's so interesting in America. People complain about the healthcare system, and I think part of the problem has been people don't know to whom to attribute blame, or is it the fault of the insurance companies? Are they the bad guys? Is it the bureaucracy in Washington? Is it the federal law? Is it federal regulation? And all of that, it just seems it becomes in people's mind just so overwhelming that the answer can seem, and the argument of the left is, well, yeah, it's gotten out of control, costs are out of control, all these different factors weigh in, and the only answer, says the left-wing minded person, the big government kind of person, is just put it all in the hands of the government, let the government take care of all of it, we'll dictate prices, we'll dictate. So tell me what's so wrong, in your view, with that approach of having that the left has, just let the government take it over?
Well, a couple of facts to be aware of. Physician reimbursement physician salaries are only about 9% of healthcare cost. Hospital reimbursement is only about a third of healthcare cost, and medications are only about 9%. So the rest of that cost, which is approximately 50%, is for things that do not add any value or add any medical care. So that's the bureaucracy, that's the insurance companies. We all know that when the government, well, first of all, when you have no competition, costs go up. And I think we are all aware that when the government runs something, it does not run as efficiently as it would if the free market system ran it. As an example, we've all know how many problems are in the Veterans Administration healthcare system. That would be ultimately what a single payer system would look like for every American. Medicare beneficiaries, when they go from a private insurance to Medicare, in almost all of them will have to buy supplemental policies because Medicare by itself will not cover the medications that they need and will not cover all the services they need. So why should we give up a great system that needs some tweaking and can be tweaked? And President Trump knows the things to do to tweak the system, to make it more efficient, to make it more competitive, to make it more cost effective. Why should we give that up to go down a road such as in the UK and Canada, where there will be long lines and people will not get the services that they need, and people will die waiting for services as they have in those countries? The cost will go up, the care will go down. Physicians will be disincentivized to continue working. It can only lead to poorer quality care for everyone. And we know how to make it better. We know there are changes that need to be made to make it better. One of the other physicians involved has an analogy that I love. He says, Obamacare and the plans, for example, that are offered by the Democrats, these big, complex, expensive governmental plans are like a Hail Mary pass in football. Like if it works, it's great. But if it doesn't, and usually it doesn't, usually it hits the ground with a thunk, it's you've wasted your chance. President Trump's plan is like the short running game. The 5-yard, the 10-yard carries are what win most games, and that's what's going to get the ball down the court. And I think if we think of it that way, it makes a lot of sense. We know where problems lie. Let's address that specific problem, improve that area, and do that as much as we can. We're going to improve our healthcare system, make it more workable and more affordable for everybody, as opposed to putting together an incredibly complex thing. The ACA ultimately had 20,000 pages of regulations. All that does is creates a headache for physicians, raises the cost. It has not improved access for my patients. Initially, when the ACA came out, I saw a few patients switch over to those plans. And since that time, I've seen many of those patients drop the plans because your viewers or your listeners are probably aware, the deductibles and out-of-pocket costs for the ACA plans are incredibly high. Most people will forego care unless they have a catastrophic thing, because $5,000 to $12,000 in deductible, when on top of paying for your insurance coverage, is more than most people can stomach. And so many people have dropped the ACA plans. I should note, because it's so frequently mentioned, that Trump does not want to cover pre-existing conditions, and that's a flat out lie. Every time he's talked about healthcare, he said, this is my favorite part of the ACA, that we continue to cover people who have health problems. It should be noted that pre-existing conditions is a insurance term. It's not a doctor term. I don't think in terms of, oh, this patient has these pre-existing conditions. For me, it's their health history. And I take every patient where they are. I don't ever refuse to see anybody because they're more complicated than the next person. So doctors don't think that way, but Trump wants to cover all of those people. None of us want to see those people who most need care to be left out. One final thing to tell you, though, is that the ACA plans, none of those covered or were in network with any of the premier cancer facilities, Memorial Sloan Kettering, MD Anderson, the Mayo Clinic. If you had a pre-existing condition, got the ACA insurance, wanted the best cancer care, you can't get it. They're not in network with the premier institutions. So those people aren't getting the care they need either, despite the rhetoric.
That is so good to know. I did not realize that about the ACA. And I also think it's a little bit similar to my point in the first 5 about whether you're going to believe that what the polls say. They have the polls that, you know, show Biden's up 10 points, and then you say, but look at the crowds and the whole crowds that are filling the stadiums every time Trump goes everywhere. Look at the crowds that are showing up at the boat parades. Those are the real tests, and the same kind of thing here as to what you're saying. This whole concept that you have people who, your patients, Dr. Skop, coming to you, and you notice when the ACA, which I assume everyone knows, ACA is referring to Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act is Obamacare, ACA. When it first came into place, you saw some of your patients, Dr. Skop, go ahead and go over to ACA plans, and then you saw them come back because they soon realized that all of the promises and as somehow providing the perfect kind of health care or health insurance simply was not realistic, was not true, and that you came to realize that from your own patients. That's great to know. And on this pre-existing conditions thing, I did want to mention to our listeners, I just think like every other pipe dream of the American left, somehow they can just paint a picture that everything will be perfect, everything will be provided, and it'll be free in this la-la land thinking of the American left. And the simple fact is, healthcare costs money. It costs money to educate doctors. It costs money to develop medicines. It costs money to run hospitals. It costs money to provide healthcare in 1,000 different ways. So someone's ultimately paying. When the government's controlling it and the government's deciding what's available, you're going to have whatever limits the government decides are acceptable. And on pre-existing conditions, government to be really clear, President Trump did commit in an executive order, he will veto any health care bill that doesn't cover pre-existing conditions. So also, I want to go back and ask you, Dr. Skop, you were talking earlier about how President Trump had, during the course of this first term, calls with doctors around the country. What kind of things were you talking about? What kinds of issues related to health care were on those kind of calls?
You know, I think he really wanted to hear from the physicians what is the reality in your world, and what can be done to make it better. I think there are so many physicians who are disenfranchised, who are burned out. So many doctors spend a large amount of their time, probably more than 50% of their time, not face-to-face with patients, but working with the electronic medical records so they can generate a paper trail of what they're doing in order to get paid. Many times, my husband's a psychiatrist, he has some patients who require specialized medications more than just the average generic that's been around for 30 years in order to keep their mental health in control, so that they can live a life. And he spends more time on the phone trying to get the insurance companies to approve a medication. So President Trump wanted to hear about those type of things. He's very interested in direct primary care, in a doctor and a patient entering into a contract without the large amount of middlemen that we discussed earlier. He cares about the patients. I think some of the executive orders that he's done, just the right to try legislation. He's done so much to make drugs available, generic drugs, getting needed medications to the public rather than being delayed with red tape. It's clear to me, and I think it's clear to the Americans who elected President Trump 4 years ago, it's clear to me that he cares for the average person who's just trying to live the best life they can and working hard. And so he's trying to make a healthcare plan that is right for them so that they and their family can stay healthy and live the American dream rather than spending way too much of their salary on insurance, paying way too much on deductibles, avoiding care they need because of the high deductibles. I think he really cares for the Americans and wants to make the system work as well as it can for them.
I love that. And I want to go back. I like your friend's analogy about football. I think the idea in life generally, you kind of move things down the path. It's the way you learn a new trade, you learn a new area of study. You don't just sit down one night and memorize everything and you wake up the next day and you're all set. It takes progress, it takes learning, it takes adjustment, it takes correction. It's incremental changes in tax system, many other areas of legislation. You've got to work the problems out. And somehow this kind of utopian left-wing thinking that says, oh, none of that, don't bother with any of that, don't bother with fix, just put it all in the government's control and we'll just take care of everything. And it has an appeal to the more a kind of a simple-minded appeal. Sure, let's just forget all the complexity to it all. I was going to mention also, I saw some of the literature summaries made of this meeting that President Trump held with the doctors in North Carolina on September 24th, where he actually laid out his plan and stressed the idea, I'm not doing a big government takes over the healthcare system. And now that I understand from you, Dr. Skop, that you've had conversations, you and other doctors, over the first term of President Trump's presidency, giving input, telling him what's needed, working in that. And this is the way real policy is made by grown-ups, by people, serious, substantive people. You listen to input, you make adjustments, but what came out of the, one thing that came out of the North Carolina meeting was trying to summarize the choice, the argument that President Trump is making for approaching fixing the healthcare system in the ways that he is considering. It's 3 points: better care, more choice, lower costs. Those three things are what he is offering through the vehicle of his many small changes, moving through, figuring out where is the hang up, where are the costs coming from, where is transparency lacking, where is unnecessary costs arising. And I saw, the more I read about it, the more impressed I was. I wish I'd seen news articles about it a little bit, explaining it more, because I think that would help people a lot. And so, do you have any other input about where you think President Trump is headed, or what would be helpful in your medical practice and making the practice of medicine better in America?
Well, I think he's done an incredible job moving the ball forward despite record opposition from Congress. He's done as much as he can do more in terms of executive orders. And I think he's realizing, and the further he and his administration get into understanding the problems, the more they're realizing just how many more things they can do. You mentioned price transparency, and I forgot to even bring that up, but nobody knows what anything costs. You go to a hospital for a gallbladder operation, you have no idea, does this hospital charge 5 times as much as one down the street? I mean, nobody has, there's no transparency at all. That's another thing that he's done. He's requiring the hospitals to post their prices. Surprise medical billing is another big thing that harms patients. Out-of-network providers. As an OBGYN, a patient may come to me for surgery. My office tells them, here's what your costs are going to be. They end up with an anesthesiologist who's out of network. Somehow the hospital's out of network. Nobody knew. And just crazy, so in some cases, 5 or 10 times the expected charges come to these patients. And many times the insurance refuses to cover them. That all needs to be opened up for analysis and for people to understand. One reason that healthcare is so expensive is everything is paid for with somebody else's money. Nobody ultimately gets the opportunity to shop around and say, well, you know, I can get a better bargain here than there. But why not? Why not make prices so transparent that people and insurances can shop around and find out where the best care can be had for the, you know, for the lowest amount of cost?
Love that idea too. Dr. Skop, I just love that doctors like you who are obviously, you practice medicine very successfully and you've been around practicing for quite a while in San Antonio, but you're also involved in the policy thinking, because so much of policy making by people in Washington who sit around in committees in Congress and the Senate and blather away about ideas how to solve things, they need to be listening to doctors like you, doctors in America who want the best healthcare system, who want to try to improve it, figure out where the problems are. So I'm so grateful that, first of all, grateful for you, but also grateful that President Trump has been seeking the input of doctors in this country for 3.5 years to try to really dig and understand where the problems are and then what policies make sense to solve them. That really sounds like a problem solver instead of a, you know, wave a magic wand and fix everything kind of solution finder. So, Dr. Skop, thank you so much for taking time to join me today.
Oh, thank you so much for the opportunity.
Great talking with you, friends. Oh, actually, wait, before you go away. What are you part of Trump? There's an organization you're part of related to President Trump, Physicians, what's it called?
Well, the big organization is called Medical Professionals for Trump. And I am on that advisory board, and I've also been involved in a smaller group. I'm not even sure if it has a name, but we've been having weekly phone conferences with the White House staff, and we've just been discussing how do we get the message out to the American people, and what do we do when Trump wins re-election to make healthcare better. And we've got a lot of ideas, and I'm very excited about the opportunity to implement many of these ideas over the next 4 years.
I love hearing that. Dr. Skop, again, thank you so very, very much for taking time to join me today.
Thank you.
Okay, folks, I think that's great to know. I'm going to, on our website, americacanwetalk.org, I have one other article I can post that's kind of a beginning of the summary of the ideas that are being discussed by people who are actually trying to solve the problems that arise in the healthcare system, as opposed to people who are telling America, you know, don't worry, magic wand, single payer, everything will be free, and of course we'll be in a disastrous state as they are in countries that have socialized or single payer healthcare, socialized medicine, where you simply lose, you end up in socialized medicine in England, in Canada, more expensive, fewer choices, actually end up, and people don't like to hear it, but you end up rationing. You end up being told at your age and your health condition, we're not going to cover this, we're only going to cover that. You take away a fundamental idea of America, which is the freedom of the individual and the freedom of the doctor to move forward in providing the best health care. The primary relationship, in fact, that was one of the big stresses out of the North Carolina conference, was the primary relationship is the doctor and the patient, not and the bureaucrat and the insurance company and the pharmaceutical company, everybody else weighing in and taking pieces away. I actually think we're going to end up, if we can stay on this path, I love that analogy she made about, 5 yards at a time. Stay in the path 5 yards at a time, continuing to fix the issues as they arise, find solutions to the various challenges in the healthcare system. Sounds great to me. One last topic I want to hit today, and this is the most amazing thing, because my opening today, I was talking a little bit about the NBA and their disastrous final game, where they had basically no one in America watching, with 6 million people, which was far, far, far fewer people than watched many other similar games. And so, and in fact, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it was a minute portion of people who used to watch the NBA Finals games. America is sick of being told by the NBA and by the left that they have to support Black Lives Matter, and that the core of the idea of Black Lives Matter is accept the broad-based accusation being made by the American left that America is a deeply racist country, a systemically racist country, and that America is simply, almost irredeemable and must punish itself for how evil it is. Americans are tired of being told that. It doesn't pass the smell test with the American people anymore. The degree to which the American left is trying to make a broad-based accusation against all of America that we're a deeply racist country. People just saying, sorry, not buying it. But I do want to tell you some interesting things. So Colin Kaepernick, You remember his name. He was a quarterback. He kind of made the national media, brought about the whole big national debate because he refused prior to games to stand for the national anthem. In fact, he kneeled for the national anthem and was very outspoken in saying the reason he was doing that is because he wanted to protest police brutality and protest racism in America. So that was his stand. Obviously, we all know all the stories. President Trump criticized him, a lot of lines drawn politically. You had players joining him, players condemning it. It's just kind of the opening, sadly, of many games now, is people watching, to the extent they are watching, people saying, well, are the players going to stand for the national anthem, going to kneel for the national anthem? You have players who stood and said, look, I love America. I'm not saying it's perfect. I'm not saying we couldn't do better in certain things, but they were always willing to stand. Other players kneeled. There's all this tension. Well, Colin Kaepernick has formed, astonishingly, I don't know what exactly they do, and I'm not really sure that I'm that curious, but he's formed an organization called Kaepernick Publishing, and they, along with another organization called Level, Level, they have a series of articles called Abolition for the People. Abolition for the People. Colin Kaepernick or someone writing for him, I'm not saying, I don't know if he wrote this or not. Many famous people don't write their own things. They have somebody else write them. But Colin Kaepernick is out with an article in this Kaepernick Publishing and under Level called, essentially, the demand for abolition. And the central demand in this first article is not just to defund the police. He is making that demand, but it's also making the demand to end prisons in America. Literally end prisons. Stop having prisons. And I want you to just let that soak in a little bit, because he's not talking about, reviewing the criminal justice system, trying to see if we can weed out racism, trying to decide if racism played a factor in certain convictions, or if we have some other problem in the justice system. He's talking about ending prisons. He's talking about defunding the police. And what I really want to say about a couple of things about, as you read the way he writes, he sounds like, I have not met the man, he sounds like he has a Messiah complex. Like somehow, because he was the one to kneel on the field, in his football games, to kneel and just prove to the world that he could, show disdain for America, disdain for the flag, disdain for the national anthem, that he could show how much he hates America, and that's his message. Understand, that's his message. America's not worthy of respect. America is not worthy of standing for the flag, standing for the national anthem. America is such a disgraceful country that it does not deserve his respect. That's his message. But you get the sense, reading him, that it's a little bit of this Messiah complex, like he's arrived on the scene in America to help all of us understand, the truth about America, the depth of truth about America, that America it truly is this deeply systemically racist country, and that it's just racism under every rock. It's the same argument as Black Lives Matter, same argument as Antifa, same argument as a lot of the leftist organizations. It's not the argument that they want to, which I would totally support, the idea of investigating every questionable interaction between police and citizens, digging in to find out when and we already do this, when an officer fires his weapon, especially if fires and whether he hits and kills a citizen, there's always an investigation. We don't have this rampant officer shooting and no investigation, no follow-up. This doesn't happen. In this country, we already investigate when officers fire their guns. If there's a shooting that's questionable, we already have all sorts of organizations, both the police organization itself, the district attorney, oftentimes the state level investigators get involved, sometimes federal investigators get involved. We look into instances where there's any question as to whether or not an officer firing his gun was justified. We already do this. But Colin Kaepernick believes that he is raising the awareness of America, that we have this rampant, just endless, unjustified, out of control officer firing of weapons against innocent black Americans, killing black Americans in unjustified numbers, in horrible numbers. And he is saying it's so bad, the system is so evil, so just ridden with evil systemic racism that there's no salvaging it. That's his argument. There's no salvaging it. That you just got to give up, got to abandon the whole system, got to defund the police, get rid of prisons, start over. He's all the happy talk, idiotic language of many leftists about the idea that we're all got to understand better and just silly level stuff. But the reason I want to talk about in this show today, obviously he's not going to be a policymaker for the Democrat Party. They're not going to enforce the idea that we're going to defund the police around the country and release everyone from prison. But I did want to say that you have a Colin Kaepernick making these arguments and very earnest. He's not, throwing something wild out there and saying, look, I know it's a little bit crazy, but here's what I'm thinking. He's serious. He's here to expose the evil of America, and he's here to save us from ourselves and save America from the evil of the police and the evil of our entire criminal justice system. And he actually thinks that he's right. So what I want to talk to you about in the last few full closing minutes of the show today is, why would he think he's right? Why does he think the country is as evil as he apparently believes that it is? I'll tell you one reason is because we have so many people in the media spinning the stories, repeating the stories, giving headlines to stories, even after the investigation has occurred, even after we've all discovered what really happened with Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri. And Michael Brown never put his hands up, never said don't shoot, never stopped charging the officer, the same officer he'd earlier in the day punched and crushed his eye socket. That officer who fired, that's what happened in the Michael Brown case. That's what actually happened in Ferguson, Missouri. But you don't hear a politician in this country telling that story. You don't hear President Obama. At the time, he could have said, let me come forward, America, before we get too far down the path of outrage over this. Maybe we should all have the facts straight. Maybe America should learn what really happened. Look, I don't want any shooting of, I wish there were never people shot and killed by guns. It's a horrible thing to go through. Horrible thing for Michael Brown's family. But the facts are, we got into a national hysteria over Trayvon. We also had the Trayvon Martin hoax. We've talked about in this show before. Trayvon Martin was not an innocent kid skipping down the street with his bag of Skittles and brutally shot randomly by somebody who was not even white, by the way, but brutally shot by a Hispanic American. Trayvon Martin was shot and killed, sadly, as he was trying to kill the man who shot him. As he was, Trayvon Martin, sitting on top of the person who eventually killed him, slamming his head into the pavement. And the person on the ground, having his head bashed into the pavement, worrying he's about to die, was able to get his gun out and shoot Trayvon Martin. That's what happened in the Trayvon Martin story. We have the Michael Brown story. But we have the real story of Michael Brown. By the way, there's a new film coming out on the Michael Brown story, which is a Shelby Steele-backed production. I'm going to be sure and follow that, try to get Shelby Steele and talk about it. My point is, one reason that Colin Kaepernick feels that he is morally right in bringing out and proposing ending prisons and ending the police is because he doesn't have his facts straight. He doesn't know those true stories. He doesn't know many other cases that became famous, and you just put the name of the victim out there, the one who was shot, and most Americans, oh yes, this was terrible. We don't actually talk about the whole story. We don't have people in positions of responsibility and authority who should be bringing out the whole story, telling the whole story. Compounded with that, we have this leftist BLM driven, the Marxist organization BLM, who is in action, who is engaged in the attack on America because they want to bring about Marxism and end America the free, America the brave, America the strong. The BLM is about the Marxist overthrow of America. The BLM happily perpetuates the myth that there is just a massive number of shootings of innocent black men in America, unarmed black men by police officers. It's practically a plague, it's an epidemic. So back to just one data point, in 2019, in the year 2019, how many unarmed black men were killed by police officers in this country? How many? And the reason I want you to stop and think about that is because if you listen to Colin Kaepernick and the BLM, you would think it's in the dozens or hundreds or maybe even thousands. At the very most, in 2019 in America, the number of unarmed black men killed by police officers was 13. 13. Now, even in those cases, the fact that the person was unarmed does not mean that the shooting was unjustified. It may be one that was unjustified, or it may have been justified given the other violent action being taken by the person who ended up being shot by the police officer. We do not have this epidemic of shooting and killing innocent black Americans that the left pushes as its storyline. And the left pushes that storyline to keep America divided, to keep us hateful, to keep people like Colin Kaepernick wound up. That's the kind of thing that Colin Kaepernick, no one ever says to him. No one ever says, how do you answer to that fact? That we don't have this epidemic you're trying to claim is true. And then we have all sorts of other reasons. I'm kind of out of time for today. But in addition to the perpetuating of lies and exaggerations by the left with respect to violence, engagement by police against black citizens, you have the whole racialization of issue after issue after issue after issue in this country, turning every issue there is into being one of race, even when it has nothing to do with race. And the perpetual racialization, the intentional siloing of America into racial categories, and then assigning victimhood status to each of those categories, and then inflicting on each of those silos of people beliefs about their fellow citizens, that somehow your fellow citizens don't care about you, they hate you, they don't care about your well-being. This is the MO, this is the standard operating procedure of the American left. To silo, to racialize, to pit us against each other. So you have, it's just one example, I'm out of time to talk about today, I'm going to talk about sometime soon. You have the Mathematical Association of America, the math teachers in America, come out with a policy paper explaining that math, like learning in school math, is racist, and that it was a scolding of teachers and administrators in our country about how they have to adjust the entire way they teach math, because math itself is racist, expectations about math and understanding of math, all of that. I mean, it's very actually insulting to people of all races to think math, which is simply math, it is a fact, either 2 and 2 is 4 or it's not. But you have even that, the torquing of America, the twisting of America, the racialization of America, actually harming the people of America, harming our culture and our ability to be the fabric, the good America that we really are. So Colin Kaepernick is a victim, in some ways, a victim not of the deeply racialized America he imagines exists. He's a victim of the leftist assault on America's culture and fabric and people that continues to press the idea that America is a deeply racist country, finds a million reasons to claim it's true, never tells the truth about these stories, the instances involved with the police officer shooting of citizens, doesn't correct the record when a lie has gotten out there, never fixes the story, doesn't put true statistics out, never tells all the good of the police officers in this country, all the good they do for the American people. You have the radical anti-American left spending its time trying to racially divide America, and Colin Kaepernick is one sad and sick outcome of that, because he actually thinks he's standing up against a society that he falsely believes is so deeply racist that he can barely function, that the only possible way to handle the extensive racism that's filled America is to clear out the prisons, end prison, and defund the police. When you watch what's happening in the streets of America today, we barely can have safety and security in our major cities because of BLM and Antifa who are engaged in the kind of level rioting and destruction they are. And the answer of the left is to end the police. Seriously, folks. I mean, it's so twisted. We'll have to come back to another day. At the end of every show, I tell you why the stories we talked about today matter to you. So today's stories. We start out our show today talking about the NBA viewers and the Electoral College versus the fake election polls. The NBA Finals, riding the wave of Black Lives Matter popularity, the most famous player on a team in a major media market, the Lakers and LeBron James. COVID puts most fans at home with nothing else to do. The most famous NBA player, aligned with Biden and the Democrats, hates Trump. Biden with a 10-point national polling lead, allegedly, and the NBA Finals TV ratings, well, they should be through the roof, right? Wrong. NBA Finals TV's ratings historically low, about 1/3 of last year's, not even half of the ratings for an early season NFL Sunday night game. That was the other stat I didn't have. Not even half the ratings for an early season NFL Sunday night game. BLM is not popular, America is not systemically racist, and Biden is not up by 10 points. Trump's Electoral College polling is strong. Trump is winning the popular vote, and Trump may win the popular vote. Even that may be in play. And the other story we covered, Colin Kaepernick goes radical, no prisons. Kaepernick, not enough to abolish the police, must abolish prisons too. The entirety of the Black experience of law enforcement defined by racist oppression. It is never about character or law breaking or colorblind moral responsibility. Democrats and Kaepernick are aligned and they racialize everything. Progressive professors now say math is racist. It's insultingly racist to claim skin color or any group identity factor affects math or the aptitude for excelling in math. Dems and Kaepernick are reacting to a crisis that doesn't exist. America is not systemically racist, and you can listen to Black conservative American leaders saying this all day long. The men who were in, and women who were in the Uncle Tom film. Many other Black conservative leaders are saying the left is lying to America when they say America is systemically racist. The moral law is universal. Responsibility for obedience and consequences of disobedience should not vary by human skin color. Police and prisons are necessary to enforce the law. And that, my very fine friends, is America Can We Talk for today. Please tune in every Monday through Thursday at 3 p.m. Central Time to America Can We Talk, where I always talk truth about America because America matters. And I will talk to you next time.
Can we talk? Truth about America.
Can you